Okay, it looks like we are live. Hi,
We
this
are.
is Curt Barone.
And this is Brad Pinsky.
All right, and we're here for another edition of Fire Law Roundup for tax day, April 15th of 2024.
Yeah, if we can, I just want to start at a moment and kind of
Wow.
dedicate the show last night as the nation's waking up to last night. Two Syracuse firefighters, Syracuse police officers were shot, killed in the line of duty. They were chasing a suspect, ran into the house, and it looked like he opened fire on them. One of them, though, was somebody I hired. He was a part-time firefighter at my fire department while I was there. I think I hired him when I was chief, but he well known, well loved in the community. His father-in-law is a longtime dear friend of ours and a longtime member of our fire department, retired now. And I mean, his daughter, this was his son-in-law, but his daughter grew up in our firehouse. They lived across the street, so she was there all the time. And he leaves, he leaves three kids, three children. So it's in Syracuse, it's a hard day for all of us. The nation's just getting it, but I can dedicate. It means nothing, but dedicate this show and our thoughts to my brother Norm and the rest of the community. And he was a member of a lot of fire, or the Moyers Corners Fire Department. He had worked at the Manlius Fire Department with me, and just a really, well-known, nice, loving guy. But anyway, I never know what to say in this, but our hearts go out to everybody. And anyway, I
Yeah.
spoke very briefly to the father-in-law this morning. I just said the nation and the community mourns with you, and I can't imagine that. But okay, so today I'm going to take this little bit out of order just so we can get to one really really interesting issue that I think we should end with, because a lot of the cases are short. So let's just dispense with a couple of short ones so we can really focus more. So first, we'll just start in North Carolina. We have yet another pink collar crime, and no, Curt and I are not saying that most thefts are women. That's not what we're saying, but yet it happens. And so now we have a administrative assistant, go figure, who stole. This is a new one for me, which I assume is one of the reasons you cited it. But now it's an administrative assistant who stole $200,000 from a North Carolina volunteer fire department. She obviously must have had access, legal or illegal. We haven't seen all of it, but somehow she had access to the accounts. But listen, I'm going to say this for, what is this, the 450th time. People, you have to conduct internal audits every month, and you have to review the finances of anybody. Well, you review the finances, period. But I'm telling you, the people who steal from you are always the people you trust. You need to stop treating them like you trust them, because ultimately someone's going to prove you wrong. So please, internal audits for everybody. I will, if anyone wants them, email me. I will share you internal audit policies and procedures. Please, please conduct internal audits.
Brad, let
Okay.
me just say
Yeah.
on the pink crime aspect of this, the issue is not women are more likely to do this. That's not at all. The women are just as likely. They're just as likely. And I think, myself included, before I met Kelly Paxton and before I really understood the gravity of the problem, my default was to trust women more than men. That men are more likely to steal from us. And Kelly's perspective is that's not at all the case. A man is more likely to rob you, hit you over the head, and take your money. But there's a equal likelihood. And so that we can't let our bias in favor of women allow us to become the victims of this type of larceny. So it's not that they're more likely, it's that they're just as likely, and you can't give them a free pass just because of their gender.
Yeah, I will say, when I started teaching theft in the fire service and EMS, probably about 10 or so years ago, because I study and I have a list, and I have a neat list we could do, but I have a list of the basic and ingenious ways how people steal. So I track how people steal. So I have, I don't know, maybe 20, 30 versions of how people steal. Now it's over hundreds of cases, right? But some are as simple as writing a check to cash or writing it to yourself and nobody ever looks. Some are setting up fake accounts and transferring money. I mean, there's some ingenious ways. One of them I'm positive I came up with and I taught at my conference. I'm not even kidding about this. And I think someone stole from me as I was saying, boy, this would be a tough way to catch you. But I teach how to steal so that people recognize how to catch it. And as I was doing that, I keep saying, okay, in this case, a woman, in this case, a woman, in this case, a woman. And I got to tell you, I would have concluded based on all the studies I looked at, and I mean tons of them, that women were 3 times as likely to steal as men. If you asked me, all of my examples mostly were women, and I never thought of it. I just kept apologizing to the women saying, I'm not trying to say it's more you, but all the examples, most of the examples, many of the examples are women. Now, look, I will say that I think men steal more money. I can't prove this, but the cases that I've seen, Mahopac in New York, Hannibal most recently, my client where the treasurer shot himself after being caught, those are much higher numbers. To me, and I'm not saying 200,000 is a small number, but the examples I come up with, the men are stealing the most. It doesn't matter. You got to audit everybody, right? But her point is right. Treat everybody like you don't trust them. Everybody's likely to steal from you. And once again, I will tell you, it is always the person you trust the most who steals from you.
Yeah. My data is the men are more, but it's fairly close. I think it's 60-40. And when you consider the number of women in the fire service, that
8%.
Obviously,
right.
Now that doesn't necessarily include office administrators. I think if you look at around the country at office administrators, there's an excess of women, higher percentage of women that are involved in those positions. But nonetheless, it's something you just can't trust anybody. I think that's the message.
Yeah. And you're doing everyone a disservice by trusting them, and not trusting them is not an insult. It's not that you don't trust them. Treat them like you don't trust them, right? By conducting audits and have password security and all these things. Treat them like you don't trust them, but trust them. Just treat them like you don't. Okay, let's go to Virginia, although I'm not really sure if it's just Virginia, but Virginia firefighters are seeking $1.5 billion from a litany, 25 or so of the companies who put out turnout gear and manufacture turnout gear. This is all over the PFAS in the turnout gear. But my real question, I don't have an answer to this. I just have the question is, if the turnout gear companies were following a federal standard, not a government standard, right? But the NFPA standard, if they were following that manufacturer's consensus standard, are they liable? And I kind of equate it in my thoughts. I haven't formed an answer. If a car manufacturer is following a federal requirement to impose certain safety requirements, and one of those safety requirements injures them ultimately, not because it was faulty, but because it was a bad requirement, are they liable? They're just following a standard. Are they liable for that?
Well, I think when you get into product liability, you breach a warranty, you got several different types of warranties, you got breach of contract, and then you have negligence. And I think your point goes to some of those claims, but it's not going to go to all of them.
Right.
And the attorneys that are handling these, and there's a number of national firms now that are handling these. I'm not sure if the law firm that's handling this is one of those firms, but I'm sure they're going to fall in line with the rest of them, because all of these cases are going to end up down at the U.S. District Court in South Carolina, for that multi-district litigation option there. So, but the bottom line is, and it's important to understand that I haven't seen the complaint. It's not just PPE, and no doubt there is PFAS in the PPE, but you've also got AFFF and some of the other contributing factors. So that's why they're going after 3M and some of these other companies. So certainly they are going after the PPE manufacturers. And yeah, I mean, they may have been following the NFPA standards, but that doesn't give you a safe harbor when you're a manufacturer to simply comply with whatever the standard is, if it turns out that the manufacturers were in possession of information that the national standard probably wasn't a good standard to begin with. I think there's another compounding factor here with the NFPA standards in that the PPE manufacturers sit on those committees, and they are the ones that are looking at it. So now divorce that from the scientific question about whether PFAS in turnout gear actually can cross the skin barrier and so on and actually affect. And I think there's a factual question there. I'm suspicious of that. I'd like to see the documentation. Not that there's not PFAS in the turnout gear. No question there is. Can that actually migrate across the skin barrier and actually cause cancer? That to me is an open. I haven't seen any scientific proof on that. A lot of speculation, a lot of Facebook speculation, but scientific proof is different.
And also, the standard, I'm not a product liability person, right? That is not a specialty, but that's a science unto its own.
It is.
But I imagine that the standard is, what did you know at the time? What was the science at the time? You can't go back, I don't believe, 10, 20 years and say what we know now, we should have known then. I'm not sure we can do that. And PFAS, really just came to light with AFFF in the last number of years.
15 years or so. But again, I think there was a time when our gear did not have it in there, and there's a time then that the standard doesn't require PFAS, but PFAS containing products is supposedly the only way that you can meet this standard. So the people who got that into the standard were fully aware that the only way you were going to be able to meet this was with PFAS containing substances. Now, a lot of different science, because perhaps at the time, there was no proof that it could get across the skin barrier. Okay, and that goes sort of to your issue. Perhaps now there is science, or there will be science at some point. So now all of a sudden what was deemed to be safe is no longer safe. So again, awful lot of science. I don't think it's helpful for firefighters to speculate and to assume because there's PFAS in your gear that it can somehow, cause the cancer. But we've got to wait until the science sort of catches up with the hysteria.
And the liability is going to be different than the damage claim, and even though proximate cause, right, what caused the harm, is not a damages issue, it will be here because you develop cancer over a number of years.
Right.
At some point, if there's liability, what year should they have known about any of this? What year should it have been remedied or not included or whatever? And if you say, well, I've been a firefighter, like one of these, the victim had throat cancer, I believe, or thyroid cancer.
Yeah.
And the question is, how long has he been doing it? When did that develop? What led to it? And proving proximate cause, for all you know, and this is what they're going to say at trial, if it goes to trial, this victim, look, there may be exposure, but there's also a million other things we had exposure to, and proving that this is what caused the injury is impossible. Now, look, thyroid, I remember Billy G talking a decade ago about we keep getting throat cancer because we wear our hoods right over and we leave it on our neck, or our strap that goes across our throat. Does that do it? But thyroid cancer was what we were talking about earlier, and then prostate cancer because we leave our turnout gear on. All of these things, what did this cause is a very difficult legal question, factual question.
And to me, just my understanding of biology, and I am a bio major, and I've done some graduate work in advanced biology issues.
You are such a geek.
I am, and it doesn't stop either. So, but the point being that once something gets into your bloodstream, it doesn't matter where it came in; it's in your bloodstream. And you think of, and I still, I like you, I go to fires, I see people without masks on, breathing in smoke and so on, and they're exponentially breathing in more toxins through their respiration than they're ever going to get through their skin. Okay. Right. So, but Once that's in your system, whether you breathe it in, it somehow magically comes through your skin, or however people think it comes in, it's in your bloodstream. It's going to move to, it's not going to, because you have a chin strap on, it's not going to go to your thyroid. That's
I
just
get
not
it.
realistic. Okay. It's going to go in, and then it's going to end up causing the genetic changes that lead to cancer, turning on genes, turning off genes, all that epigenetic stuff that, just could blow you away when you think about it. Bottom line is, we got to wait until the science catches up with us. Like I've heard it explained that there's dogma. Okay, there's dogma in that you believe something. You fervently believe in God. You fervently believe that cancer is caused by these chemicals and so
But it
on.
doesn't
You
make it
you
so.
believe it. You believe it, right? That's dogma because you believe it. There's science, and science is what we currently know about reality, what we were able to empirically prove through research. Okay. And we tend to confuse those two. And it's important with something like this because if we're going to do something because of dogma, we're going to change the way we're operating because of dogma. That's kind of crazy that we want to make our decisions based on science. Okay. It may not be perfect, and science is always going to be a little bit behind the curve, but we don't want to be going based on emotion or dogma. We want to be going based on science.
Yep, no question. And I look, I'll tell you, we get better. When I started, which wasn't that long ago, 30 years ago, firefighting, or whenever in 88, we weren't wearing masks on overhaul. And then we thought we were being so smart until this report by this guy, Curt, which said, it's cyanide, hydrogen cyanide is killing us or whatever. And we weren't using HCN meters. We were using carbon monoxide meters. Hey, there's no CO2, there's no CO in the air. And then I remember we put, and I lecture all the time because of you, we put HCN meters in. I purchased a bunch of them. And so our rule was, before the masks come off, the HCN meter goes on. And I remember the first time I saw the HCN meter go up, and I was the only one left in the room looking at it because everyone else took off. But I think, oh my God, well, we didn't know for the decades beforehand. And just like this. So I go back to proximate cause. How do you prove what made you sick? There's no reasonable medical certainty with all the crap we're exposed to: garbage fires, dumpster fires, train fires, car fires, house fires. How are you going to prove that? And I don't
All the
care how
stations I was assigned to, we had pest problems. Okay, and they come in and spray for roaches, they spray for ants, they spray for that. That all gets into the environment as well, and diesel exhaust and all that. And so the point being, there's plenty of potential sources for carcinogens. Let's see what the science says, and not go off in a sort of dogmatic way.
Okay, well, that was supposed to be our two quick ones.
Yeah, there we go.
Let's go to Kentucky. This is a great point to make. I've raised this in a number of cases. I'm seen it before.
I am so glad that we came across this one.
This was great by you. I'm inevitably going to cite it. I have some others like it. But here we have a person who is on, let's make this really simple because it is simple facts. It just blows my mind. People don't think this is a problem. So we have an individual who ultimately would have been on the committee, the panel that decides someone's guilt, innocence, punishment.
He's a board member. He's a board member.
He's a board member, right? So at the same time, he testifies against the person, right, against the respondent, and then
in a disciplinary hearing. So this is a disciplinary process,
right? This is all due process discipline. So he first is a witness, right? I'm going to put my witness hat on, right? And then he comes over here and he has the board member judge hat on. Now, yes, it was a unanimous decision, the court mentions, but it doesn't matter. He tainted the process by being involved. You cannot wear two hats, people, right? If I'm doing this, you cannot wear two hats. You can be a witness or you can be a decision maker. You can be an investigator or you can be, right? You cannot ever wear two hats. Think of this, when I teach this, think of this as the legal criminal system. Who prosecutes? The DA. Who investigates? Well, the DA or the police. Who defends? The public defender or defense attorney? Who's the who runs the hearing? The judge. Who decides guilt? The jury. And never two hats shall be worn by the same, right? The investigator, in this case, the witness against them does not say, oh, let me get out of the jury panel, testify, then go back on the jury panel and decide, yeah, I seem like I was a pretty credible witness. I agree with myself.
I believe myself. Yeah, I believe myself.
And yet, this happens all the time.
It does.
All the
I go
time.
through this in my classes, and I use an example of where a firefighter, you have a firefighter who is directly disrespectful to the fire chief, and the fire chief suspends him for whatever, 5 days. And so, when you break it down, just like you did, you break it down. Okay. So number one, who's the complainant? Okay, the fire chief. Who's the victim? Because sometimes the complainant is the victim, sometimes the complainant is not the victim. Okay, the victim is the fire chief. Okay, who did the investigation? The fire chief. Okay, who was the sole witness? The fire chief. Okay, and who decided guilt or innocence, or who's, I call it the adjudication. Who was the adjudicator? The fire chief. I mean, that, you know what? You can actually do that in certain countries. China, for example, Russia.
Well, okay, yeah.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
No, but there are certain countries where due process is not it's presumed that whoever does the investigation, like the police side, is presumed to be neutral and that they can serve as a neutral. That is like a big red flag in our judicial system. You can't serve on one side and then serve as the neutral, and you can't be a witness, obviously.
The only one I don't have an answer to, the only scenario I don't have an answer to, where a statute delegates the decision-making power to a board.
Yep.
And to no other, even if there's a hearing officer who can make recommendations. Ultimately, the board, and let's say in New York State, a board of fire commissioners of 5 people, right? They're the decision makers. Okay. The only scenario I can't come up with is what happens when it's at a board meeting, someone is disrespectful or insubordinate to the order of the board or in front of them, and all 5 board members are witnesses. Whether they testify or not, if they're the sole witnesses, what do you do? Because you've taken out, right? Now they're all witnesses. They can't be the decision maker.
The analogy there, I think, is contempt of court. And we'd have to go. I'm not up on the contempt of court, the due process aspects of contempt of court, but I know there's civil and criminal contempt, and I know that the procedures in terms of finding somebody guilty of criminal contempt are different. So I'm sure that there's case law that would look at that particular issue, but which I thought where you were going with this is that when you set up whatever discipline process in a city fire department, you set up your process, whether through the city charter or however, in a nonprofit where you're still required, like in New York, to afford due process. When you're writing your bylaws and stuff, you've got to consider, what do we do when there's a conflict like that? How do we go about resolving it? Whether it's going to be decided by some third party, whether it's going to go to, in Providence, a lot of times we have municipal court judges that handle traffic and that type of thing. And, you could easily reassign the adjudication part of it to someone who's got that sort of judicial background.
Yeah,
that's a neutral.
Yep. And I'll tell you what I'm doing in bylaws, we'll talk about when we do our must-have bylaws again, but I set up a random jury selection process. Choose 5 uninvolved, unrelated people out of a lot. Those 5 members will be the jury, have someone present to the jury, right? And they're neutral as can be, they're not involved.
There you go.
The situation I can't come up with is the one I presented. I don't know what happens, but that wasn't here. And I guess I'll end my 2 cents on this one is it happens all the time. It happens all the time that somebody, either testifies as a witness or they said, I'm familiar with it, whatever. You can't do that. You cannot change hats. People, please stop screwing with discipline because it is a due process right. You have a property interest in your position as a member, as an employee, as an officer, and some respects employee, but you can't do what we're doing. And I know a lot of lawyers, unlike me, a lot of lawyers don't sue because people don't have the money, especially to defend their volunteer. I sue. We're waiting for a couple of cases, but the courts ultimately hopefully will realize we're going to start awarding attorneys fees because it's the only way people can afford to protect their due process rights. And this one was a blatant violation, should never have happened. It should have violated common sense, but it was a great court decision. Everybody should remember this type of thing.
Super.
Okay, let's we have two more. One where we really want to spend some time on, but let's go to Oregon now. We have a lawsuit. It's just a lawsuit by a chief who's seeking $5 million over disability discrimination and constructive termination. It's a little confusing, although it should be simple. He develops Parkinson's, and there's a note that after he was diagnosed, he issues some findings against another individual. Those findings are ultimately overturned.
I think what happened was there was a female employee, and she wanted to work from home, and she was coming off of pregnancy leave, and he told her no. And I think this is a problem. Every chief, I'm sure you've had it, I've had to have it. Whenever you got to tell somebody no,
liability,
you just created an enemy for life. Oh. And so he told this person no, and so she filed a complaint against them, and I don't like the way he talked to me, whatever. So that all was investigated, and it turned out to be unfounded. Okay, so he was clear to that, but he claims that there was some perception issues with regard to his Parkinson's, and also the stress from that
allegedly
investigation. Right, was exacerbated, and that ultimately he felt that the department had kind of forced him out because of his disability. I think he's got an uphill case here. I do too. Yeah, not that I'm not sympathetic.
They found in his favor that the report's unfounded.
Yeah, but the stress, I think the couple of things, the stress from the investigation, and also the way that he claims he was being treated exacerbated his Parkinson's. And
but there's no way to reasonably accommodate the investigation. You have to investigate it. There's no way to reasonably accommodate right. So that, in my mind, I'm like, what? Well, how do you prevent the stress of the investigation if they retaliated against him, which is again a tough proof because they found in his favor.
Yeah, there were a couple of things that happened. They also eliminated his position, and he felt that they eliminated his position because of a perception of his condition deteriorating. Then they ended up he had a conversation with the chief. They kind of went back and they gave him a different position. He was going to be demoted from a division chief down to battalion chief. Then he ended up getting reassigned. So, I mean, my reading of it, this is the complaint. So we don't have the city side of it. My reading of, you can read it two ways. You can read it, he was discriminated against. You can also read it that the department was trying to accommodate him as his condition deteriorated. They were trying to accommodate him, trying to find a place for him. And at the end of the day, it wasn't enough. With all the other things that were going on, the stress was a little bit too much. So again, I think he's got a hard case. I don't know. I'm sympathetic for him. I'm also sympathetic for the department in terms of you've got somebody who's a good employee. You're trying to accommodate them. You're trying to do it. And at the end of the day, it's just not, no matter what you do, it's not enough.
Agreed.
Speaking of which.
Yeah. Speaking of which, let's go to Rochester, New York, right down the street from me. I was blown away by this.
That's up the street, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's an hour and 10 minutes up the street.
It's north.
There's so many, I don't know. I'm going to give my 1 cent on this, but I don't know. You said to me in an email, so our viewers know, we could spend a day on this. I disagree. I think we could spend a month on this because there's so many facets to this. So here's what's happening generally. We have a Rochester City firefighter, a very good, very busy, aggressive department for whatever that means. And so they're a city-based fire department. The mayor, by the way, is African-American. Let's start with it. The mayor is African-American. So an employee, a female employee, and I'm going to shrink these facts down. We could spend hours on the facts alone, as the 72 or whatever page complaint does. But the facts generally are that a female, one of, I think, 15 employees at the time, who I got to be careful because I think I know her. It's a Jane Doe, and I'm obviously not going to mention, but
you want
I
me
represent.
to go through it?
No, I can go through it.
Okay.
I can. That's not the problem. I'm trying not to out anything if it's the person I suspect. In any event, the individual, and this is my take of the look. There's so many facts, we can have many takes, right? But she starts dating a salesperson, a vendor, and I think they're living together, but at some point he starts killing her animals. Things get a lot crazy. And essentially, as now a victim of domestic violence, which New York protects and has for 30 years, but the protections have gotten a lot stronger. You can't discriminate against somebody for being a victim of domestic violence. You have to accommodate and give. You don't have to provide them a safe workplace necessarily, unless it's your employees or even your vendors. Now, in what I call the Cuomo sexual harassment laws from 2020, you can't allow someone to be harassed or victimized by one of your vendors. So he's continuing to be one of the vendors. He's apparently friendly and, with a lot of the leadership, and ultimately, they're suing because you didn't protect us, give a safe place, etc. But that's like this portion of these.
Well, I think that's important, because what she's alleging is that the department didn't keep where she was assigned each day confidential.
Yeah.
And how do you do that? I mean, seriously, how do I maintain accountability so that a battalion chief or other officers can figure out where somebody is and yet comply with the law, the domestic violence protection law, that says you've got to accommodate? And one of the I guess
reasonably accommodate.
Well, her request for accommodation was that you don't put her on the roster, that she go to certain places where she's going to, people aren't going to know what's going on, and the other guy isn't going to be able to find out where she's assigned.
And that's an accommodation, but it's not a reasonable accommodation.
I think that's it. And on top of this, she apparently is alleging sexual harassment, that she's being sexually harassed. Right. And now she's got a series of people that she doesn't want to work with. Okay, so now we've got to keep her identity confidential. Okay, and where she is. So, like, I don't know what is going to show up on the roster, but just maybe Jane Doe. I don't know. But then you're still going to be able to figure out who it is. We can't keep our rosters confidential.
They're subject to FOIL.
That's what I'm saying. Never mind the public records aspect to it. Okay. Right. And then she doesn't want to work with this guy, doesn't want to work with this guy, doesn't want to work with that guy because they've made remarks about her. Right. And
I feel for her. Let's be clear to the viewers before you attack Curt and I. We feel for her. This is not right. We're going on the legal and factual reasonability issue.
This case could walk in our office today. We could get a phone call. We could have somebody come in with the exact same fact pattern. And the question is, what can we do in terms of lawyering for this person? What can we do? And I think there are some things that could have been done. And I'll get right to it. I think that she should have gotten a restraining order against this guy.
Right. But that's for her to do, not necessarily her employer to do.
Right. That's not right. But get a restraining order against this guy. Okay. And then, if necessary, get a restraining order to order the fire department to do these certain things. Okay. And then this problem is resolved. But short of the restraining order, you're expecting your employer to jump through these hoops. And I mean, I'm a former safety officer, and accountability is very important to me. How do we document where people are without putting them on the roster somewhere?
Right. And when you're on a call, you're in public. You can't be hidden. Maybe it's not so what are you going to do? You maybe replace her nameplate on her jacket, but I agree with you. I understand her requests for an accommodation are possible, but they're not reasonable. Yeah. But I got to tell you, that's not my main takeaway from this case.
Okay.
My main takeaway from this case is a 2023 study they did, which is the more interesting part of this. It's all interesting. In 2023, I didn't know this, but for this complaint, in 2023, the city itself, I believe, commissioned a independent study upon on the issue of whether there's sexism, racism, and other discrimination in the Rochester Fire Department. this is a big fire department. I don't recall how many employees there are, but they have 15 females. Now, that may be consistent with what the IFF says, and the IFC says there's 8% of 7.5 to 8% of firefighters in the fire service are women in the career fire service, much lower in the volunteer, I think. But I guess my amazement with some of the recitations in this case, which go on for pages and pages, was the fact that they commissioned the study. The city commissions the study, and then they're using the study against them. This lawsuit uses a good faith study to make it look like this is a racist, sexist department. They even, the study finds that one of the chiefs of the department is allegedly sexist, right? And again, that's why I mentioned they've got an African-American mayor, but they're using the study against them to say, look at the environment, look how bad they are. Yet the city commissions the study, and the city's the defendant. It's like a damned if you do, damned if you don't. We're looking into our problems. We're calling us out on our problems. And now you sue us, right? As background, using what we commissioned against us. And the problem I have with that is you and I, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, all think that there's a systemic issue of isms, right, in the fire service. There is, let's admit it. And not everyone, not right. It's not you're a racist, you're a sexist, but it exists. And now we try to do something about it. Who's ever going to want to study this now if it's going to be admissible against us? And I got to tell you, if I'm a legislator right now, I'd be saying, we will give you immunity, and no study that looks into problems will be used against us. But if I'm chief, I'm looking and saying, hell no, I'm not doing a study of problems in our department. If you're going to use our findings against us, that's really what I look as the longer term takeaway from this case. I read the whole complaint. It took hours, 72 or whatever pages. It is amazing. So there's so many facets to this case.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Now I think about it, I wasn't looking at it, I wasn't putting the pieces together the way that you did, but that's a really it's a concerning insight. I just in my studies and stuff, we're looking at things like confirmation bias. And when I was looking at the study, I mean, there's consultants that you can come in that they're going to find something. They are going to find something, whether it's there or not. Whether it's there or not, their upbringing, their education, their focus in life has been to find certain things. And then there's others that I think are more objective. And I don't know the people who did this one, if they are suffering from the confirmation bias, and they always find it, or whether or not this was a fair and objective test. And you can't go just based on, the process that they used. Okay, certainly that can give you some insight. But one of the amazing things as I'm getting more into my psychology studies is that I don't think a psychologist has ever done a study that didn't come out proving what they set out to prove. And that's alarming, because you don't see that in the medical community. Right. You see they're testing certain meds, they're testing certain surgeries and outcomes, and you don't know what's going to happen. Not in psychology.
And that's the point of peer-reviewed studies, right? Peer-reviewed studies are there to make sure that the testing and the methodology is neutral.
You would think, but unfortunately, and my class now is winding up on advanced social psychology, and we're talking about a lot of these things. And again, everybody who sets out to prove something proves it. That is concerning to me. And I do question whether or not someone who goes in and does this kind of study, if they always find a problem, well, maybe there always is a problem, okay? Or, maybe we're looking for problems, and when we're looking, we find them. And
let's give an example of that. So some things are unintentional. For example, I believe, based on some organizational behavior classes in my past, I believe that's what a big part of my master's was organizational behavior, group dynamics, very similar to what you're doing. Websites, right? I didn't make this up. Websites where you see 60 males, white males, maybe one black male, maybe one female, but the websites, we're not pushing out the website of saying, let's promote white male faces. That's not our intention. But the effect of it may be to give the example that you're not welcome, you're not wanted, you're not right, you're not solicited. And as proof of that, I show a video, 2-3 videos, one of the Navy from the 80s. It is all white males. 100% of the Navy's video, We Want You, is a 100% white men. Fast forward now to the Navy's videos, the Marine videos. It's all people of diverse backgrounds, male, female. You can't tell. It's all right. It's all a mix. We recruit who we aim for, who we target. And the Navy did that. I don't know whether it's intentional or unintentional in the 80s and early 90s. They were just recruiting white men. Now we recruit everybody. I don't know whether that's intentional or not, but it definitely has the bias of recruiting who you're showing in the video. And now I always pull up this great video or a great picture. It's an ad for a sheriff's position somewhere down country. And it's a woman, a young Hispanic woman. And it's basically saying, look, young Hispanic women or anybody, you can be me. This is who we want. And you're now seeing ads which are more generic, right? So as a marketing bias, now, does that mean we're racist or sexist? No, it just means maybe we aren't aware of what we're doing in our videos. And somebody said to me, I'll end on this. Somebody said to me, well, what are we supposed to do if we only have one female? Put her in every video, or one African-American individual, put him in every, I said, no, but at least be honest about it. We're trying to recruit everybody. So I don't know. It's not intentional ism, right? It's not discriminatory. It's just happens.
Right. Yeah, no, I think that's well said. What's the solution? I think we're moving in the right direction, society-wise. It seems like we're moving in the right direction, but I think the last two cases we talked about, you got to ask yourself, is the expectations just a little bit beyond what fire departments can currently do to accommodate people?
Reasonably accommodate.
What is a reasonable accommodation? And what was reasonable 20, 30, 40 years ago, and what's going to be reasonable today, and what's going to be reasonable in 5 years or 10 years? I think there's a continuum, and I think hopefully in the big picture things are going to get better for everyone over time. But in the meantime, we're going to have to deal with these case by case lawsuits that pushes one way or the other.
But I kudos to the city of Rochester for apparently, commissioning the study and being very introspective and looking at it. But wow, to have that used against you blows me away.
Before we break, could you, and I don't know if I didn't ask you ahead of time, but the New York law on domestic violence, could you just, because I'm not sure, I don't think many states have gone as far as New York does, and that could be a major issue here. So what does that domestic violence law from an not from a criminal perspective or a injunction perspective, but from the employment perspective?
Right. The 2019 amendments, which was, I think 3 governors ago, but the 2019 or 2020 amendments just added to the list of you cannot discriminate based on age, gender, sex, right? All these sexual orientation added, and status as a victim of domestic violence. You cannot discriminate somebody in the terms or conditions of their employment, whether it's upon hiring or whatever. And I never thought of, I kept thinking, how would we discriminate against somebody as a victim of domestic violence? Now, clearly the state legislature thought you could. So that's all it says. You can't, it's in the list of, and a fire department can't do it. It's in our executive law or human rights law, but you can't, it's very simple. What that means, however, is how do you not discriminate? It doesn't say you have to reasonably accommodate. It says you can't discriminate against them in terms and conditions of their employment. I didn't know how what are you going to put on an exam or on an application? Or have you been beaten by your parents or boyfriend or whatever? But it's very simple. But this is going to challenge it to make it much broader, maybe than it was meant, maybe not.
Yeah.
But to, what's discriminating against somebody? Not accommodating them or not reasonably accommodating them. This is what the lawsuit says. They're trying to bring in the ADA standard of reasonable accommodation to status as a victim of domestic violence. You can't discriminate against them. And I think it's reasonable to bring in the reasonable accommodation standard. What can we do to ensure you're safe, et cetera? I would be saying this is more of a workplace violence situation. It doesn't matter. And the workplace violence laws have been in effect. There's some new amendments for healthcare in New York, but workplace violence has been in effect federally and statewide for a long time, right? You, in your workplace, let's assume it's a building or the community, you have to make sure that citizens can't come in and harass you, shoot you, all these things. And there's very strict workplace violence. I peg this more as a workplace violence issue. It's also a sexual harassment issue. In 2020, New York State's laws were amended dramatically to provide a lot of protections, but one of them that it was extended to is your contractors cannot come in and harass you or harass your employers. And you as an employer, the fire department's employer, will be liable if you allow a contractor's employee, like here, although they started dating first, right? You can't allow them to come in and harass you. There's so many possible laws that are applicable. I'm not saying that will lead to liability, but I never thought of it in these terms because it's just 5 words or so. And, you know, it added as a, in your status as a victim of domestic violence. That's all it does, is it says you can't discriminate. There's not a lot to it, but man, this really tries to flesh that out.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, I can see in a small business where maybe you've got an employee that is the victim, but there's a lot of drama that's surrounding that particular victim, and the employer decides to fire them. I can see the law coming in that case, that you shouldn't be fired, you shouldn't be discriminating against someone. But then in terms of accommodation, I mean, you know, if your name isn't going to appear on schedules and different things, how are you supposed to schedule people? You know, and how are other people supposed to know who's supposed to be, how's a supervisor supposed to know if your name isn't on rosters and things? It's just, you know, that gets to your point about whether or not the accommodation is reasonable or not.
And that's where they try to go. But, and look, if it's a vendor, right, in New York State anyway, and this should be the rule everywhere, you shouldn't allow your vendors to send people who are going to be harassing. And in fact, in New York State, as a part of bidding, there has to be a clause whenever you bid something out that says you provide the same sexual harassment and harassment training to your employees. They have to certify that they've received that training, that they can't come and harass somebody, even to a vendor or customer. You can't harass them. I think that's a very good law, frankly, right? We shouldn't allow our, you know, contractors to be on site and harassing us. But here, you know, they dated, and it almost gets to the point where, like, okay, well, you're okay dating our vendors, so that's not harassment, but now they're crazy. And I'm not saying that, you know, we should.
These are all facts. These are all allegations. We don't know what's true, what's not. We're not suggesting, you know, but anyway,
right. We're just looking at the allegations, but it's becoming very difficult to be an employer that we have to, and I'm not saying I disagree with this, but it's becoming very difficult to be an employer where we have to chase the social lives or the private lives of our people and keep them safe at work. Look, we lock our doors. We, you know, we have cameras everywhere. We have entry doorbells. I mean, we do what we can to protect our employers. We can do that. We're in a building. But the fire service is a public entity, which is always out there. I'm on your side, or, you know, coming to your side of thinking, it's very difficult to reasonably accommodate somebody in that regard.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, you know, when a restraining order against the person solves it, you know, you get the restraining order, boom, that's it. The person cannot come near a fire station, period. You know?
Yeah. It extremely interesting case. People should be looking at this, but I got to tell you again, I go to the other issue, which is I firmly believe everyone should commission a study, right, and surveys, et cetera, to see if they do have different types of issues. But, you know, to have them used against you.
Floodgates, yeah, really.
Yeah, you know, can you imagine we're confirming the study that says, okay, we have a sexism issue, and now every female sues. You know, that's not what the studies are meant to do. They're meant to lead to solutions. And I don't know, I'm not saying anything about the victim, the alleged victim here, but as to the city of Rochester, I think you did the right thing. You stepped up, and it's unfortunate because people aren't going to want to do these studies anymore. I'm not bashing the, you know, the plaintiff here. I have a real concern because this is what I think we should be doing. I think we should be commissioning these studies and seeing what's going on. And, you know, so well, anyway, that's it. For me anyway, and I can't end again without just it's just a local tragedy, but very local in our case. I have to say this, there were hundreds of police officers outside the hospital yesterday, and you realize how small a community is, as we all know, when there's a line of duty and now 2 line of duty deaths, and when they're close friends, or as much as we talk about the liability and the legal side of this, the time when the fire service, the emergency services are the best is in times of tragedy. Forgetting the armchair quarterbacks, when we come together and we support each other, when people who don't even know the people are shedding tears, and the nation and the community, supports you. That is the best part of the worst part of our job. So.
Well, let me just add my own tragedy for today. My uncle, TJ Verone, passed away this morning, and he was a lieutenant in the fire department that I started. And in fact, on my 16th birthday, I handed him my application and he signed it as the sponsor.
Oh, that's great.
And my grandfather at the time was the chief. And but on my birthday, you had to be 16. I turned it in, and but he passed away this morning. He's had a tough time recently. But TJ started as a volunteer firefighter in North Providence. He went in the military during the Vietnam War and came back, got a job. He did some dispatching, then became a police officer in North Kingston for 20-something years. And but he's always had a love for I think he would have been better off becoming a firefighter. I think the police, being a cop, is tough. It's tough.
Especially, yeah.
Yeah, as but TJ passed this morning, so
sorry about that.
We'll dedicate it to both. All right, well, that's going to do it